Hey guys, welcome back. I am Katie, where we break down complex financial and geopolitical stories into insights you can actually understand. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications because what I'm about to show you is going to shake everything you thought you knew about modern warfare. At 06:03 hours local time, 12 Ukrainian drones lifted off from a staging area in Sumy Oblast. Their target, the 100th Grau arsenal near NA, 930 kilometers to the northeast, the deepest strike ever attempted against a Russian ammunition depot. But to reach it, this trick had to work first. The morning air was still dark when the drones rose one by one from the hidden launch site. They were small, light, and built from simple materials, but they had been carefully prepared for this single mission. Their engines hummed at a steady pace as they formed up and turned toward the northeast. They were not flying fast like jets or missiles. They cruised at about 160 kilometers per hour, keeping a tight formation and steady spacing between each other. From a distance, and especially on radar, they were meant to look like something much more dangerous than they really were. A Russian radar operator in Bryan's blast noticed faint signals at the far edge of his radar screen. At first, they were weak, barely noticeable against the background clutter. But as the objects moved farther into his coverage zone, the signals became sharper and clearer. He counted 12 returns, then thought he might be seeing a 13th flicker behind them. Each radar signature looked similar in size and shape. The radar cross-section matched what he would expect from a cruise missile. That was not the kind of contact anyone ignored, especially early in the morning. He immediately marked the tracks and passed the information up the chain of command. Within 3 minutes, the data appeared on the display of a Buk M2 battery commander positioned about 70 kilometers north. The commander leaned over his console and studied the screen. 12 confirmed tracks were moving northeast in a disciplined line. Their speed was consistent. Their altitude held between 600 and 900 meters, following the shape of the land below. They were not climbing high like aircraft. They were flying low and steady, like cruise missiles designed to avoid detection. The radar returns suggested objects weighing between 400 and 500 kilograms. That was enough to make anyone take them seriously. The range was 58 kilometers and closing. At their current speed, they would enter his 50-kilometer engagement zone in roughly 4 minutes. The numbers were clear, and the situation was tense. His Buk launcher carried 4 ready missiles on its rails. 4 shots, 12 targets. Reloading would take at least 6 to 8 minutes. At their current speed, the contacts would pass his position before he could reload. The commander felt the pressure building. The objects were heading deeper into Russian territory. They could be real cruise missiles. They could even be a new system he had never seen before. But he could not afford to assume they were harmless. No one advanced in their career by letting potential cruise missiles fly past without trying to stop them. The risk of doing nothing was greater than the cost of acting. At 0627, he made his decision. He ordered the first launch. 2 Buk missiles shot off the rails with a roar, accelerating quickly to several times the speed of sound, as the fire control radar locked onto the lead contacts. Guidance corrections were sent continuously as the missiles closed the distance at nearly a kilometer per second. At 0628, the first warhead exploded in the sky over Bonsk. A bright flash lit the clouds as thousands of steel fragments spread outward in a deadly cloud. 1 radar return disappeared instantly. The system registered a successful intercept. The commander noted the kill in his log. He had no idea that the target he destroyed weighed only 8.9 kilograms and was made mostly of plastic and foam. It cost less than a bicycle. He had just spent millions of dollars destroying it. Without hesitation, he ordered the second launch at 0631. 2 more missiles streaked into the sky. Again, the radar tracked the intercept. 2 more explosions followed. 2 more contacts vanished from his display. 4 missiles fired in just 4 minutes. The transloader vehicle pulled alongside to begin the reload process. Hydraulic arms moved carefully as fresh missile canisters were positioned onto the rails. Even under ideal conditions, it would take at least 6 minutes before the system could fire again. The remaining 8 contacts continued on their path. They would pass the Buk's location in about 5 minutes. The commander reported his engagement and requested additional support. He felt a sense of pride in achieving a 100% hit rate so far. What he did not realize was that he had just fallen into a carefully designed trap. The drones had done exactly what they were meant to do. At 0636, the 8 remaining contacts crossed his position and continued northeast. 60 kilometers to the east, a Tor M2 battery near Smolensk detected them at 0637. The Tor was built for short-range defense. It carried 8 ready missiles and was designed to protect key sites from cruise missiles and aircraft within a 12-kilometer radius. Against real cruise missiles flying directly at it, the Tor was dangerous and effective. But these contacts were not heading toward it. The battery commander examined the tracks. The contacts were bearing 243 degrees, range 31 kilometers, and moving northward. Their projected path would take them about 18 kilometers outside his engagement envelope. He could not reach them from his current position. He considered moving the vehicle northwest to cut them off, but the Tor's wheeled chassis could only manage about 40 kilometers per hour on the available roads. By the time he repositioned, the contacts would already be gone. He chose to track them passively and report their movement up the chain. At 0638, an S-300 battery located 120 kilometers east of Smolensk began tracking the swarm. The S-300 system was designed for high-altitude threats, such as aircraft flying at extreme heights or ballistic missiles descending from above. Its 48 N6 missiles could reach targets up to 150 kilometers away. In theory, it had the range to engage the contacts, but the radar system was optimized for targets well above ground clutter, not low-flying objects hugging the terrain at 800 meters. On the commander's screen, the fire control solution appeared and disappeared repeatedly. The signal was unstable. He could launch on a partial solution and hope the missile's onboard seeker would acquire the target during the final phase of flight. But the probability of a successful hit under these conditions was perhaps 40%. Each missile cost between $1.2 and $2 million. Launching several on weak locks would be an expensive gamble with uncertain results. He reported the situation and requested guidance. Meanwhile, at 0639, the Buk battery in Bryansk completed its reload cycle. 4 fresh 9M317 missiles were now ready. The commander checked the geometry of the situation. The contacts were bearing 067 degrees at a range of 82 kilometers and moving away from him. Any attempt to intercept would be a stern chase, forcing his missiles to use most of their fuel just catching up. That would leave little energy for final maneuvers if the targets changed course. He understood the odds were poor. Still, he reported ready status and waited for orders. Above him, the coordination center displayed the full picture on an integrated screen. 1 Buk with missiles ready but poorly positioned. 1 Tor that could not reach the targets. 1 S-300 struggling with degraded radar lock. 8 cruise missile-sized tracks continued northeast at 160 kilometers per hour, moving through the gaps between overlapping coverage zones. 3 batteries were tracking them. 12 missiles were available. Yet there were no clean engagement solutions. At 0640, the Regional Air Defense Duty Officer received the updated report. He reviewed the options quickly. The first option was to order immediate engagement despite degraded solutions. The Buk could attempt a stern chase. The S-300 could launch on partial locks. Between 8 and 16 missiles might be required. The cost would range from $6 to $12 million. Even then, the chance of stopping all 8 contacts was low. The second option was to scramble fighters. 2 Su-35 aircraft from Kino could reach the area in about 20 minutes. Each fighter carried 8 R-77 air-to-air missiles, more than enough to eliminate the remaining contacts with extra rounds available. However, this option had a serious drawback. The moment the fighters entered the engagement zone, every surface-to-air missile battery in the sector would automatically receive a weapons hold order to prevent friendly fire. The ground-based air defense network would temporarily go silent until the fighters cleared the airspace. Every minute he waited was another 2.7 kilometers deeper into the motherland. At 0641, the scramble order went out to Kino Air Base. The command moved fast once it was given. Within seconds, the order reached the pilots and ground crews at the base. Engines roared to life as technicians pulled safety pins and cleared the runway. 3 minutes later, 2 Su-35 fighters were already airborne, climbing sharply into the morning sky. Their engines pushed them northeast at nearly 1,500 kilometers per hour, far faster than anything on the ground could match. As they climbed, their targeting data streamed into the cockpit displays. 8 cruise missile-sized contacts bearing 047 degrees, range 280 kilometers, altitude 800 meters, speed 160 kilometers per hour. Intercept estimated in about 14 minutes. At 0649, an automated instruction spread across the entire air defense network. Weapons hold in all sectors. Friendly aircraft operating in the engagement zone across Bryansk, Smolensk, and Kuga Oblast. One by one, radar systems adjusted their status. Targeting radars went silent. The Buk battery that had just finished reloading lowered its readiness level and stopped actively scanning for firing solutions. The Tor battery near Smolensk stood down completely. The S-300 battery farther east continued tracking passively, but kept its fire control radar cold. For the moment, the sky belonged to the fighters alone. By 0658, the Su-35s made radar contact with the remaining targets. The pilots descended to a lower altitude to improve their engagement geometry. Their onboard radars locked onto the slow-moving contacts without difficulty. The first R-77 missile launched at 0701, streaking ahead with a bright flare from its motor. The missile tracked smoothly, showing no sign that the target was reacting. No evasive maneuvers, no electronic countermeasures, no sudden changes in speed or altitude. At 0702, the missile detonated. The pilots continued methodically, engaging one target after another. Each launch was controlled and deliberate. On their screens, the contacts disappeared one by one. At 0713, the flight lead transmitted a short report. Engagement zone clear. 8 contacts destroyed. Threat neutralized. With their task complete, the Su-35s turned back toward Kino Air Base to rearm and refuel. Across western Russia, the ground-based air defense network slowly came back online. Radar dishes began sweeping the sky again, but they found nothing. The duty officer logged the operation as a successful interception of a Ukrainian cruise missile strike. From his perspective, the mission had gone exactly as planned. What he never realized was what had truly been destroyed that morning. The objects that fell from the sky over Bryansk and Smolensk were not cruise missiles at all. They were Hakai-20 Ukrainian decoys. Each one weighed only 8.9 kilograms and was built mostly from plastic and foam. But hidden inside each fuselage was a device called a Lüneburg lens. This simple piece of engineering changed everything about how the drones appeared on radar. A Lüneburg lens is a spherical object made of multiple layers of material with carefully controlled densities. These layers bend incoming radar waves in a very precise way. Normally, when radar waves hit an object, most of the energy scatters in different directions. Only a small portion returns to the radar receiver. But a Lüneburg lens works differently. It captures incoming radar energy and reflects a large portion of it directly back toward the source, almost like a mirror designed specifically for radio waves. The result was dramatic. A drone weighing less than 9 kilograms suddenly appeared on radar as if it were something far larger. To the Buk's fire control radar, each Hakai-20 looked like a 400-kilogram cruise missile. To the Su-35's radar, the illusion was exactly the same. Without visual confirmation, the operators had no way to tell the difference. And by the time the fighters got close enough to actually see the targets, the engagement was already finished. The decoys had done their job perfectly. While all eyes were focused on the fake swarm, something else had been happening farther south. About 40 kilometers below the main engagement zone, flying at just 200 meters altitude, 9 A-196 Ludi drones had spent the last 24 minutes slipping quietly through airspace where every SAM battery was offline and every fighter was looking somewhere else. They had used the distraction to open a corridor through heavily defended territory, and they still had 740 kilometers left to travel. At the far end of that long route was something Russia never expected Ukraine to find, and certainly never expected them to reach. The 9 drones continued northeast, sometimes as low as 20 meters above the ground. Their terrain-following systems kept them just above the treetops, blending them into the landscape. The temporary gap in defenses had carried them about 50 kilometers, but more than 800 kilometers of hostile airspace still remained. And the weapons hold order that protected them behind the fighters did not apply to the defenses waiting ahead. At 0847, the first Ludi encountered trouble. It had been navigating carefully between 2 radar coverage zones east of Tula when its Skynode navigation system detected a mismatch. The terrain below did not match the satellite imagery stored in its memory. What should have been open farmland was now a partially frozen reservoir. The water level had risen several meters since the imagery had been captured, changing the shoreline the drone used for navigation. The onboard computer tried to fix the error. It scanned nearby terrain features, searching for something recognizable. Finally, it located a road junction about 2 kilometers north that matched its stored map and corrected its course. But the delay lasted 47 seconds. That small hesitation pushed the drone about 800 meters off its planned route, placing it directly inside the detection envelope of a Tor battery guarding a rail junction near Tula. The crew had only seconds to react, 8 seconds from detection to launch. At 0903, a second Ludi drone faced a completely different problem. Its engine, a small Chinese-made piston unit, had been running at high throttle for nearly 3 hours. The internal temperature climbed beyond its safe operating limit, Fuel consumption rose sharply as the engine struggled to maintain speed. The numbers became unavoidable. The drone would run out of fuel roughly 40 kilometers short of its target. There was no solution the onboard computer could calculate. It continued flying, maintaining course and speed, until 0947 when the engine finally seized over Nizhny Novgorod Oblast. The drone glided silently for about 90 seconds before crashing into an empty field. There was no explosion. The warhead required a valid target lock to arm, and without that signal, it remained inert. At 10:31, a third Ludi drone flew too close to a Pantsir battery escorting a military convoy. The commander faced a decision similar to the one made earlier by the Buk operator. An unidentified low-altitude contact heading deeper into Russian territory. No weapons hold order, no friendly aircraft nearby, no reason to hesitate. 2 missiles launched at 10:32. The first hit at 10:33, destroying the drone instantly. 6 Ludi drones remained. Ukrainian planners had expected losses of up to 40%. They were currently at about 33%, and still over 520 kilometers from the target. The numbers were still barely acceptable, adjusting their routes around newly revealed defensive positions. They followed narrow gaps identified weeks earlier during mission planning using a system called Skynode. This technology was what made the Ludi drones different from earlier long-range Ukrainian drones. Older missions had relied heavily on GPS navigation, which depended on satellite signals. Russian electronic warfare units had become very effective at jamming or spoofing GPS. A false signal could make a drone believe it was dozens of kilometers from its real position, sending it off course or even back toward friendly territory. Skynode solved this by ignoring satellites completely. Instead, it worked like navigating in the dark using memory and touch. The drone's cameras compared real-time images of the terrain below with high-resolution maps loaded before launch. No external signal was required, no radio link to jam, just a computer matching shapes and patterns while flying at high speed. The system was not perfect. Snow cover, shifting water levels, or new construction could alter landmarks. It worked best in daylight or strong moonlight, which was one reason the mission launched at dawn. Even so, it was reliable enough for long-distance navigation through contested airspace. 6 Ludi drones crossed into Castro at 14:23. 12 kilometers ahead lay the 100th Growl Arsenal, spread across 2 square kilometers of birch forest northeast of NA. The complex included bunkers, warehouses, rail sidings, and open storage areas. At 14:26, the drone's cameras captured the target for the first time. The footage showed a fully active facility. Trucks moved between storage bunkers. Forklifts loaded pallets. On a rail siding near the eastern edge of the complex, 4 flat cars carried large crates that did not match anything in the standard Russian military inventory. The crates were too large for artillery shells and the wrong shape for rocket systems. The markings were not Cyrillic. Whatever was stored there, it had not come from a Russian factory. At 14:27, the Pantsir battery guarding the arsenal detected the first inbound contact. The operator stared at the display. One track appeared first, low and fast, bearing 237 degrees, range 18 kilometers. Then another contact appeared at bearing 194. Then a third at 261. The drones were not flying in formation. They were approaching from multiple directions, converging on the depot from separate angles. The operator quickly realized the difficulty of the situation. He had one system with 2 autocannons and multiple missiles, but 3 incoming targets approaching from different directions. The Pantsir's radar could track multiple objects at once, and its twin 30mm cannons could fire up to 5,000 rounds per minute combined. Against a single drone, interception was straightforward, but 3 drones approaching simultaneously created a much more complex problem. The guns could only point in one direction at a time. Swinging from one target to another required about 2 seconds. Locking onto a stable firing solution took another 1.5 seconds, and delivering a burst strong enough to guarantee destruction, total engagement cycle 6.5 seconds per target. At 160 kilometers per hour, a drone covers about 290 meters in 6.5 seconds. The operator quickly chose the closest threat, the contact at bearing 237 degrees, now roughly 11 kilometers away, and began the engagement sequence. The guns rotated into position while the radar searched and locked onto the target. As the drone closed to about 4 kilometers, the autocannons opened fire. Streams of shells tore through the air, and the first Ludi drone shattered into pieces, breaking apart in a burst of composite fragments that scattered across the sky. At 14:28, the operator immediately shifted to the next target. He swung the guns toward the contact at bearing 194 degrees, now less than 6 kilometers away and still closing. The system searched again. Lock acquired. The cannons fired in another controlled burst. The second Ludi was hit and destroyed at 1429, falling in fragments before it could reach the facility. But while the operator was focused on these two threats, the third drone had continued closing the distance. By the time the guns began to turn toward it, the drone was already inside 3 kilometers. As the operator prepared to engage the third drone, 3 new contacts suddenly appeared on his radar display. Another group of Ludis was approaching from the north in a loose formation. While the Pantsir system had been busy fighting the first 3 drones from the south and west, the remaining drones had circled wide around the eastern edge of the complex. They used a forested ridgeline to hide their approach and avoid early detection. The radar had been focused on tracking, locking, and firing at the active threats. By the time the operator finished the second engagement and swept the radar north, the next wave was already dangerously close. He had only seconds to react. The closest of the remaining drones was still the third one in front of him. He had about 6 seconds to destroy it before it reached critical range. In those same 6 seconds, the northern group would close another 3 kilometers. The autocannons finally lined up on the third Ludi at just over 2 kilometers. Fragments flew off as shells struck the airframe. The drone staggered in the air, visibly damaged, but it did not fall. It kept flying forward. By then, the warhead inside its nose had already armed itself. At 1430, the first surviving Ludi slammed into a storage bunker in the southern part of the complex. Its 75-kilogram shaped charge warhead detonated on impact, punching straight through the bunker's reinforced concrete roof. For a split second, nothing seemed to happen. Then the stored ammunition inside the bunker began to cook off. Artillery shells stacked from floor to ceiling ignited in a chain reaction, sending blasts and shockwaves outward. Only 4 seconds later, a second impact hit the northern section of the facility. This drone struck a warehouse filled with crated rockets. The explosion tore through the structure, igniting propellant and detonating stored munitions. A third impact followed soon after. Flames and debris shot into the air as secondary explosions began spreading across the complex. Then came the fourth impact. This was the drone that the Pantsir had damaged but failed to destroy. Despite being hit, it stayed airborne long enough to reach the rail siding at the eastern edge of the facility. It dove directly into the flat cars carrying large crates marked with unfamiliar symbols. When it detonated, the explosion looked different from the others. It was brighter, hotter, and far more violent. Within seconds, secondary explosions began rippling across the entire site. Ammunition detonated in waves. Stored propellant ignited, feeding growing fireballs. Warheads inside crates exploded one after another, creating a chain reaction that spread across the depot. The blast grew larger and more frequent, merging into a continuous roar. The sound of the explosions rolled outward like thunder and was heard in NA 3 kilometers away. And it did not stop. Later analysis would explain why the destruction had been so massive. The crates with the unfamiliar markings were not Russian at all. They were Korean. Inside them were KN-23 ballistic missiles, North Korea's answer to modern short-range missile systems. These were weapons Russia could not easily produce on its own. They had been transported thousands of kilometers across Asia and stored in a depot that Russian planners believed Ukraine could never reach. But they were wrong. Bye for now.